Farmers were usually rough as a cob, but they could also be gentle and fun-loving. Dinah Hunter remembers when her father was all of the above in a bag of Bull Durham.
Daddy leaned on the fence beside me and called, "Come, boss! Come, boss!" And 23 cows raised their heads and looked our way. "Come, boss! Come, boss!" Daddy's voice boomed out again, and the cows moved toward us, and all the neighbors heard and knew it was milk time. While we waited for the cows, I watched Daddy take his bag of Bull Durham tobacco from his pocket and roll a cigarette. He had the biggest hands I had ever seen. They were brown and calloused, with huge knobby fingers and thick tobacco-stained nails. I learned to watch out for those big hands when Daddy was mad, but oh, they were so warm and gentle when they soothed an aching head or rubbed away the growing pains in my legs. The secret to avoiding his hand was to watch his face, especially his eyes. Daddy's eyes were so big and so dark they were almost black, with dark, graceful eyebrows. As I watched Daddy's hands, I thought about the previous night. Daddy was milking Old Red, and I was hiding in the hayloft above. I wasn't supposed to play up there, but sometimes I did. This time, I forgot to get out before milk time, and I was stuck. It was hard to sit still. Every time I moved, the hay rustled, and I was sure Daddy heard me. "Who's up there?" Daddy said. I held my breath and listened to the silence below. "What's going on up there?" Louder this time. Silence. Then Daddy started whistling between his teeth, and I could hear the streams of milk squirting into the bucket. It sounded as if the bucket was almost full, and I knew Daddy would have to go empty it before long. When I no longer heard the milk, I peeped over the edge of the hay. I couldn't see Daddy, so I sneaked down the ladder. About halfway down, I missed the step and fell right into the manger, hitting Old Red in the face. Poor Old Red. She jumped and kicked, trying frantically to get free of the stanchion, her eyes rolling wildly. The milk bucket slammed against the far wall, and milk splashed all over. And there stood Daddy, milk running off his shoes and dripping from his pant legs. He was staring right at me, his eyes huge and wide and shooting fire like bolts of lightning right at me. A dull red crept up his neck, and the muscles in his jaw bunched as he clenched his teeth. He was so big and scary and mean-looking, I really didn't know what he was going to do. Suddenly, he grabbed the empty, dented bucket at his feet and with a wordless bellow of pure rage hurled it at me. "Get out of here! Get to the house!" The bucket crashed against the stanchion, and I ran for the house, screaming bloody murder all the way. As I ran, I could hear the bucket clanging again and all the cows lunging and bellowing to get free. "What's wrong with you? Stop that screeching," Mama said. "You've been out there bothering your father again." Later, during dinner, my brother, Rob, related the whole miserable story. He had seen it all through a hole in the wall. I kept wishing he'd shut up before Daddy got mad again, but he just kept on. I sneaked a look at Daddy, only to find him watching me with a funny gleam in his eyes and a lopsided twitch around his mouth. Then his head flew back and his eyes squeezed shut. Loud, thunderous laughter erupted from his wide-open mouth, and his whole body writhed and convulsed, nearly tipping over his chair. Back in the pasture the next day, Daddy finished rolling his cigarette, and I glanced nervously up at his face and hoped he wouldn't remember last night. I always suspected Daddy had Indian blood in him, for he had high cheekbones, a long, straight nose, and thick, straight hair which he combed straight back. His mouth was wide, with full lips and huge tobacco-stained teeth. His chin was cleft, square and stubborn-looking. His big ears matched perfectly his big, long face. Daddy was tall and lazy-looking, his broad shoulders slightly slouched and his slim hips tucked under. His movements seemed slow and smooth, never jerky or hurried. But when he walked through the pasture, arms swinging and his long legs striding rhythmically, it didn't take long to realize just how fast he moved. It seemed I was always running to keep up with him. "Wait, Daddy, my legs hurt. Wait for me." Daddy would stop and rub my legs for a minute. Then he'd take out his bull Durham and we'd rest while he rolled a cigarette. "What's wrong? Your legs too short?" He wore a suit to weddings and funerals. The rest of the time he wore jeans and faded denim shirts. When he went to church, he put on clean ones with no holes at elbows and knees. "I'm a farmer," he'd say. "Everyone knows that. Why try to look like something else?" Whatever he wore, he always smelled of tobacco, and there was always a bag of bull Durham in his shirt pocket. And a skinny little girl followed him everywhere, carrying a discarded bull Durham bag filled with marbles.
Barns weren't the only important buildings on a farm. Whether you called it the outhouse, backhouse, privy, or necessary facility, the little house out back holds a special place in the lore of the good old days. Here is a well-known ode written by Charles Rankin, who laments the passing of the backhouse. When memory keeps me company and moves to smiles or tears, a weather-beaten object looms through the mist of years. Behind the house and barn it stood a half a mile or more, the hurrying feet a path had made straight to the swinging door. The architecture was a type of simple classic art, and in the tragedy of life it played a leading part. And oft the passing traveler drove slow and heaved a sigh to see the modest hired girl slip out with glances shy. We had our posy garden that the women loved so well. I loved it too, but better still I loved the stronger smell that filled the evening breezes so full of homely cheer, and told the night o'ertaken tramp that human life was near. On lazy August afternoons it made a little bower delightful where my grandsire sat and whiled away an hour. For there the summer morning its very cares entwined, and berry bushes reddened in the streaming soil behind. All day fat spiders spun their webs to catch the buzzing flies that flitted to and from the house where Ma was baking pies. And once a swarm of hornets bold had built a palace there, and stung my unsuspecting aunt, I must not tell you where. Then Father took a flaming pole. That was a happy day. He nearly burned the building up, but the hornets left to stay. When summer bloom began to fade and winter to carouse, we banked the little building with a heap of hemlock boughs. But when the crust was on the snow and the sullen skies were gray, in sooth the building was no place where one could wish to stay. We did our duties promptly, their one purpose swayed the mind. We tarried not, nor lingered long on what we left behind. The tortures of that icy seat could make a Spartan sob, for needs must scrape the goose-flesh with a lacerating cob that from a frost-encrusted nail was suspended by a string. My father was a frugal man, and wasted not a thing. When Grandpa had to go out back and make his morning call, we'd bundle up the dear old man with a muffler and a shawl. I knew the hole on which he sat was all too wide, I found. My loins were all too little, and I jackknifed there to stay. They had to come and get me out, or I'd have passed away. Then Father said ambition was a thing that boys should shun, and I must use the children's hole till childhood days were done. But still I marvel at the craft that cut the holes so true, the baby hole and the slender hole that fitted Sister Sue. The dear old country landmark. I've traveled around a bit, and in the lap of luxury has been my lot to sit. But ere I die, I'll eat the fruit of trees I robbed of yore, then seek the shanty where my name is carved above the door. I ween the old familiar smell will soothe my jaded soul. I'm now a man, but none the less I'll try the baby hole. Could an outhouse be hazardous to your health? Melody Miller says so in her merry memory of the day the outhouse blew up.
Everyone had an outhouse or a little house out back that served its purpose when nature called. This story took place on a small farm south of Edison, Nebraska, back in the early 1930s. A farmer and his wife had a few acres of farmland. One day the farmer's wife was cleaning some clothes with naphtha gas. There were no cleaning facilities then, so if a garment needed to be spotted or cleaned, they were washed in naphtha gas and hung to dry. This gas was also used in gas lanterns. After cleaning a few garments, the farm wife wondered what to do with the gas. Back then, if you didn't know what to do with such things, they were dumped down the outhouse hole. And this was exactly what she did with her bucket of naphtha gas. Soon after she poured the gas down the outhouse hole, her husband came home and, feeling the necessary urge, proceeded to the outhouse. Now there was one thing that the farmer enjoyed doing, and that was smoking his pipe while sitting on the throne in the outhouse. He took his pipe out of his pocket and carefully filled the bowl of his pipe with tobacco. He took a stick match from his overalls pocket, struck the match, and lit the tobacco in the bowl of his pipe. Taking a few deep draws on the pipe to get his tobacco burning, he relaxed and thought about his accomplishments of the day. And then he dropped the match into the other hole of the outhouse. You can guess what happened next. Boom! The match, which was still lit, ignited the fumes and the naphtha gas, and he got a flash burn on his posterior. He ran out of the outhouse, hitching up his pants, and stood in amazement as the old outhouse burned to the ground. His wife hadn't thought about such a thing happening. It wasn't funny to the farmer at the time. After the farmer's posterior healed and a new outhouse was erected, there were plenty of laughs and jokes made about his experience in the outhouse.
Today's homes are often measured by how many bathrooms they have. 2-bath, bath and a half, and maybe a luxurious 3-bath home. That holds nothing over Robert Gay's childhood farm. You see, Robert had a 3-privy home.
I was a young boy of 10 in 1927, living on a farm in a rural part of Vermont with my father and mother. The house was an average old farm home of that year and time, with 1 privy. In order to get to the privy, one went from the kitchen through a back room, as it was called, and through a woodshed, walking on a narrow walkway made of boards. It continued on through a long wagon shed to the end of the building. There stood the privy, half in and half out. My uncle called it the half outhouse. There was a 1-room school at the edge of our property that was being renovated into a superior school. They put in new windows, a heating system, and all new chemical toilets. That did away with a long double outside privy. One end was for boys and the other end was for girls. My father, who liked to take advantage of any situation, asked if he could have the old double privy for the lumber, of which the builders approved. One day my father yoked up the oxen, hitched them to the large stone boat, and went to the schoolhouse with me tagging along. Once there, my father took a 1-man saw and proceeded to saw the privy in half, favoring the girls' side because it was in better shape. Once it was sawed in half, he loaded the outhouse onto the stone boat and dragged it to our house. He attached it to the side of the shed and cut in a new door for it. Now we had 2 privies, with the last one being about 50 feet closer than the old one, which I can tell you meant a lot when one was in a hurry. A few days later, my father must have had time to think about it, so he went back and got the other half. This time he attached the boys' half to the south side of the barn for the convenience of those who worked in the area. My dad would often boast that he was the only one in the valley who had 3 privies with no waiting. For a boy of 10, it was a big experience to see a building sawed in half. Also a lesson in how to make use of any unwanted things and to be thankful for what you have.
Hettie Parks remembers when Mrs. Adams found herself in a very smelly situation. You see, Mr. Adams had meant to take care of shoring up that dilapidated old outhouse, but he never got around to it. That was before Mrs. Adams took a stinky fall.
On a cool, bright October morning in 1930, Mrs. Adams fell into her toilet pit. Back then, only a few homes in our little railroad town had indoor plumbing. Privies stood in backyards. Mostly they were clean and neat, swept and whitewashed, and the pits were lined, all but the Adamses' privy. It was a ramshackle thing with leaks in the roof, sagging floorboards, overfull pit, and a door hanging by one hinge. That outhouse was a disgrace in our neat neighborhood, where people prided themselves on their well-maintained homes, an eyesore the whole neighborhood could smell when the wind was right. My father and other neighbor men had often spoken to Mr. Adams about the condition of his outhouse. Mr. Adams would agree that it did need cleaning and some repair done on it, and he had to get around to it one day soon. The trouble was, Mr. Adams' soon never came. The Adamses were an easygoing, childless couple in their late 50s, the oldest people in the neighborhood. Mr. Adams ran a gas station, and Mrs. Adams, whom we children adored, always had a full cookie jar and time for a chat with us. Both the Adamses were dedicated church workers. She sang in the choir and nursed the sick. He was always the first person to church and the last to leave. This Sunday, he had gone ahead of his wife as she was a little slow getting ready. The church was only 3 blocks, and Mrs. Adams didn't mind the walk on a pleasant day. After leaving the house by the back door, she stopped at the privy. My parents' home was across the street from the Adamses, and as my mother and I started down the walk toward the church, we heard Mrs. Adams' voice calling for help. As we hurried across the street and into the Adamses' backyard, we could tell her cries were coming from the outhouse. "That door has jammed and caught Mrs. Adams," Mother remarked as she grabbed the door and gave it a hard pull. The door swung open, and there was Mrs. Adams, hip deep in filth. She was clinging to the toilet seat with both hands, and broken floorboards were embracing her waist. Tears streamed down her face. "Oh, I can't move," she wailed. There was no way Mother alone could get her out. Mrs. Adams was what was then politely called a heavy-set lady. "Oh, help me! I'm about to lose my grip. I'll drown." Mother sent me running for my father. He often found an excuse to skip church, so he was home reading the paper. He came with me, and other neighbors, hearing the ruckus, came hurrying to the Adamses' backyard. The men grabbed Mrs. Adams' arms and pulled, but the muck kept sucking her back down. Finally, someone got a rope and tied it around her waist. The men all heaved. She was out. Mother wrapped a blanket around the weeping lady and helped her to the house. Noticing us frightened, gaping children huddled there, Mother told us Mrs. Adams was fine and for us to go on home. She also told us to keep our mouths shut. Mother spent the rest of the day calming the bruised, hysterical Mrs. Adams and helping her wash off the filth. Mrs. Adams' clothes Mother pitched into the toilet pit, except for her expensive corset, which was worth salvaging. Mr. Adams was not concerned about his wife's failure to show up at church. He figured she had been called to nurse someone. When he drove into his yard, he was met by a sober, stinking delegation of neighbors who demanded that he do something about that outhouse tomorrow morning, which he did. It was a week before Mrs. Adams could face her neighbors, and a month before she left her house after her stinky fall.
Embarrassing situations aren't restricted to the outhouse. Case in point, Juni Dunklin's aunt and the Pantaloon party in the pasture.
One beautiful spring day, my aunt was searching the attic for a misplaced chair. To her surprise, she came across an old trunk hidden in a far corner. The year was 1918, the beginning of America's newest recession. Folks were tightening their belts and digging in to keep their farms safe from closure, their schools open, and their tables blessed with plenty of food. Our large farmhouse was no different. Several relatives who were on hard times had moved in, and together we were all working hard to stay on top. Fortunately, our crops were plentiful and a full house was exactly what my mother wanted anyhow. The walls rang with the laughter of children, and the adults were enjoying themselves preparing the household for the coming wedding of a cousin. When my aunt opened the trunk, she was amazed to find a lot of old clothes which must have belonged to my grandparents. She quickly called a couple of cousins, and together they dressed up in the old garments. My aunt put on a fancy lace-trimmed pair of pantaloons. The others dressed up in nightcaps, petticoats, and old hats. They laughed themselves silly as they made their way outdoors to take pictures. After posing for the camera, they started to cut up and play around. Nearby, the old bull was watching balefully. He never liked anyone in his pasture that he wasn't used to. Scornfully, he pawed the ground and snorted. My aunt and cousins began to run. Unfortunately, the pantaloons had long ties on each side of the legs to make the pants fuller. These ties came loose, and as my aunt tried to run, her feet got tangled up in the ties, and down she went. The two cousins, not knowing that she had fallen, sped on toward the fence and safety. The bull came to a full stop almost on top of my aunt. Curiously, he sniffed her with a big wet nose, then pawed at her. Auntie screamed and rolled over and over, trying to get away. Finally, the bull became disenchanted and walked away, and the two cousins rushed back to rescue a very frightened and subdued lady dressed in a pair of muddy pantaloons. For years, the entire family would laugh at this story, and each time it was told, it grew. After a time, it became a gory tale of blood and screams and awfulness. But the truth was, it all happened as I stated. Except I didn't describe the blushes and embarrassment my relatives endured as they trooped woefully back into the house with a full complement of various aged men, all clapping and cheering their dreadful experience in the pasture. The bull survived, but I was told he never rushed a lady again. Perhaps he learned better than anyone else that it doesn't pay to take any lady lightly, in pantaloons or not.
Bulls weren't the only animals with a mind of their own out in the fields. Leon Harden found out that spring planting with a mule wasn't as easy as Grandpa made it look. Join Leon as he relates the adventures of an Arkansas plowboy.
Born and raised in the hill country of western Arkansas, it seemed that I had spent most of my 10-year-old boyhood at the end of a hoe handle. My goal in life was to grow big enough to plow so I wouldn't have to hoe anymore. I chopped furiously at the stubborn grass and weeds that had invaded our new cornfield, being careful to avoid cutting off any of the tender young stalks of corn. Enviously, I watched my grandfather as he trudged leisurely in the cool, moist furrow behind Old Bill, our family mule. Finally, my mother rang the bell, which was made from a plowshare and hung outside the kitchen door, to call the family in for dinner, our midday meal. Gosh, I hoped we wouldn't have corn. After bowing my head while my father said grace, I sneaked a hungry look out of the corner of my eye at the steaming bowls of food. Drumming up courage, I asked, "Grandpa, can I try plowing this afternoon?" Expecting his usual, "No, by thunder," I almost dropped a serving bowl when he looked at me with a twinkle in those clear blue eyes that could see everything. "Yep," he said, "I think you've growed enough to try a round or two." Heaven was just around the corner for me. I could hardly wait to finish dinner. I led Old Bill alongside the chopping block in the barnyard, climbed up on it, and put the harness on under my grandfather's watchful eye. Then I laid the plow over on its side and drove the old mule, or he led me, out to the small patch my grandpa had decided to let me plow. He said, "Now, son, you want to lay this first furrow straight and true. If you don't, the whole field will be hard to plow. Now pick you out a point on the other end of the field and plow straight to it. Giddy up, Bill." Manfully, I struggled along behind the plow with the lines to control Old Bill wrapped around my back, the way Grandpa did. The old mule went pretty straight, too. We ended up on the opposite side of the field, near the little tree I'd selected for an aiming point. Feeling pretty proud of myself, my mind wandered a little bit. Speculating that I'd never have to hoe again, I pulled on the right line and turned the mule to plow my back furrow. As soon as the barn entered Old Bill's line of sight, that's where he decided he wanted to be, and he took off for the barn in a dead run. Every 30 feet or so, the plow and I would hit the ground. After several bounces, I was finally able to sink the plowshare into the ground. The trace straps broke, and since the lines were wrapped around my back, I continued to bounce along behind the mule until the lines slipped free. The wreck that hobbled back into the barnyard was me. Rivulets of sweat stung the scratches on my face and arms. My body hurt almost as much as my pride, and I intended to teach that mule a lesson. Just as I started to bust Old Bill between the eyes with a 2x4, a strong, work-hardened hand took me by the collar. I was hustled from the barnyard to the back porch where Grandpa kept his razor strop. After giving me a few licks to grow on, he said, "You don't punish a dumb beast 'cause you don't know how to do your job. Now get your hoe." I had some growing up to do.